I'd like to introduce our first speakers today. We have a duo, Sue MacDonell and Amy Pettigrew Porter, and they are from Waipapa Tamataro, University of Auckland. So Sue is a registered dietitian who works in the nutrition department at Waipapa Tamataro. She has a practice and research interest in how best to identify those who are malnourished in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She's chair of the National Malnutrition Steering Group and is program director for the Master in Health Science, Nutrition and Dietetics. Amy is a New Zealand registered dietitian working as a clinical needs assessor with the Health of Older People NASC at Whataora Southern, based in Dunedin, and working primarily with community dwelling older people. As the sole dietitian in a team, she's led education initiatives to strengthen nutrition risk identification and management. She also contributes nationally through the National Malnutrition Working Group, where she leads a project evaluating the most appropriate malnutrition screening tool. Now, the presentation is entitled Improving Care of Malnourished Older People, and I understand it involves interRAI. So that's why you're here. That's why we're here. So I'll hand over to both Sue and Amy and let us know if you have any problems. And online, just shout out if you can't hear or something goes wrong. So either of those microphones work, and you do have to have them closest.
Okay. So I'm a little taller than Nairi. I'll just lift it up here.
Not that anybody would notice.
Kia ora tātou. So I'm Sue. Amy, we're playing tag today, so I'll start us off. We're going to set the scene a little bit to start with around what malnutrition in this context means and talk a little bit about some of the work that's happening with interRAI and why we're interested. And then we really want to hear from you around areas that you think we need to improve on in terms of care of malnutrition in New Zealand. So as Nairi said, we're both members of a national malnutrition action group looking to not necessarily standardise but come up with recommendations for how best to identify and manage malnutrition across all sectors of care, aged care being one of them. We're also looking at community care and also acute care. So there's quite a bit going on within that action group. And I guess one of the things that we're very aware of is that at the moment it's a dietetic-led group, and we really want to broaden the interdisciplinary nature of that group and also get some idea about where the research needs to go in terms of supporting people who are working with older adults in these various settings. So, okay. So we've pretty much covered that. So we've got 4 sections today and there'll be 2 breakout groups. So if you're online, there will be an opportunity to meet with other people online and share your sort of ideas and thinking that we then want to put back into the chat so that we've got that to take away with us. So I'm just going to start with the first section initially, and then Amy's going to carry the bulk of it with the remaining ones with me chipping in where I can't be quiet. So if we just set the scene, in this context, we're talking about undernutrition. Malnutrition covers the spectrum from being underweight and malnourished right through to being obese. So it essentially means poor nutrition or inadequate nutrition at both ends of the spectrum. But in this context, we're talking about undernutrition as the synonym, I guess. And certainly if you're familiar with interRAI, you'll have heard of the undernutrition cap. And really what we're meaning there is a state where people haven't been able to eat enough food or fluid to meet their needs. And then there's a physical change in terms of body composition. So it's characterised by a loss in muscle mass and fat mass as well. And what that then leads on to is an impact on physical ability and impaired clinical outcomes, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. It essentially occurs in 3 contexts. So we have the malnutrition of starvation, where people aren't eating enough. Perhaps it's caused by increased needs through acute disease, or it could be the consequence of a chronic disease that is putting extra requirements on the body that the individual's not able to meet. Why do we worry about malnutrition? This is pretty much my life research, if you like, and it's where most of my teaching with our students also occurs. So malnutrition has quite an impact on just about every body system, and this diagram actually sort of covers all of the physical consequences of malnutrition. So you can see it ranges from reduced immune function to increased risk of falls and fractures, reduction in muscle mass. And we tend to think of the muscle mass as being just arms and legs and what we use to go about our activities of daily living, but it also has an impact on those hidden muscle systems, so things like respiratory function, cardiac function, and just about any body system really that we care to think about. In terms of inter-RAI and older adults, it particularly increases the risk of pressure injuries. And so often malnutrition and pressure injuries will go hand in hand. And there is also that increased risk of mortality. It just reduces our ability to actually fight back from any sort of insult that the body has and then recover. And so there is a greater risk of mortality. Frailty and malnutrition tend to occur hand in hand. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. We're not sure which comes first, but both will actually contribute to both syndromes. And then I guess the other thing is that all of these things add up to a reduced quality of life. So individuals are less able to go about the activities that they might enjoy. It impacts cognitive function. And so therefore they're not able to participate in the activities quite as much as they might like to. This diagram always makes me a bit giddy, but it's essentially sort of illustrating the vortex or the spiral that can happen once malnutrition sets in. So again, that chicken and egg situation where perhaps there are some consequences of aging that actually cause malnutrition in the first place. So we get a reduced appetite, some of our senses reduce, taste and smell that we really rely on to make food taste and be appealing. But as malnutrition progresses, that can also then impact on these things, and they just keep going round and round until eventually we get this quite severe state of malnutrition, which also then contributes to other syndromes of older adults, such as sarcopenia and the frailty that I've talked about. So again, our malnourished older adults are have a much greater risk of falls, immobility, and many of the other sort of conditions that go along with being of an older age, but not necessarily that should be taken for granted as being part of older age. The two of us actually quite like this quote that comes from the WHO, that actually maintaining adequate nutritional status is one of those key rights of being older, that we shouldn't necessarily expect that we lose weight as we get older. That's a bit of a urban myth that it just happens because we're aging. It actually happens because we're not eating enough. But on the flip side of that, there's also that protective role of actually carrying a little bit of extra weight as we move into older age. So I tell my students that once the time I hit 65, I'm actually quite relaxed. I don't need to think about a body mass index anymore. Having a little bit of an extra cushion is protective for lots of those things that we see older adults suffering from. But I guess it's not just about the physical impact, it also has quite a marked impact on the cost of healthcare as well. We don't have a lot of data in New Zealand around the cost of malnutrition, but there's been quite a big systematic and meta-analysis done in Europe, and they're seeing reductions in the magnitude of about 6,000 New Zealand dollars for well-treated malnutrition per year per person. So it reduces admissions to hospital, it reduces the need to visit the GP. There are all those sort of spin-off effects that actually have a benefit for the health system as well, rather than just the individual. So how do we determine whether someone's malnourished or not? This model came out of the Malnutrition Knowledge Hub out of Europe. So MANUAL is sort of the short acronym for that group. And they've defined the determinants of malnutrition at 3 different levels. So right in the middle there, you've got the red malnutrition disc. And then there are the 3 etiological factors, if you like, that cause malnutrition. So we've talked about low intake, maybe having increased requirements, and then also reduced nutrient availability. So if someone's got a gastro condition, for instance, that causes malabsorption, then that will also contribute to malnutrition. And the slightly lighter green triangle, that's really those direct impacts that might then lead to malnutrition. So it talks around, and each of those are linked to those 3 causes of malnutrition. So things like the high requirements are caused by inflammation or an increased metabolic rate, right through to the low intake being perhaps a lack of food or not being able to shop or cook as people have in the past, difficulty with chewing or swallowing problems, and then that reduced nutrient bioavailability where perhaps they've got problems with nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, those sorts of things, all can add up to not being able to meet our nutritional needs. In the outer yellow triangle then those are lots of other things that then contribute via those direct determinants. And all of the screening tools for malnutrition draw on those different determinants in different ways. And Amy's going to talk us through the inter-RAI cap and what it actually contributes to the undernutrition cap for malnutrition. And then we want to hear a little bit around what you look for when you're doing an inter-RAI assessment as well. So I'll hand over to Amy.
Thank you.
So what we've done is have a look at this model here and then map that a little bit to from the inter-RAI assessment. And the two assessments we've looked at is the home care assessment and the long-term care facility assessment, which are fairly similar assessments. So we can see in this lighter green, level 2 determinants, so those then impact on the dark green into the red circle there, we see that diarrhea and vomiting are both captured. In section K, we talk about dentition and chewing problems, dysphagia, and a lack of food. And then we have IADLs in difficulty shopping and preparing meals and difficulty with eating. We take a step back even further and have a look at some of these other determinants, which are more indirect, but we've got diagnoses that are captured. We have more of section K that is of dry mouth and poor dentition, physical inactivity, mood, loneliness, living alone, poverty, sensory impairment, vision and hearing, and we have some of infections and inflammations captured. So I want you to see that there's quite a lot that the inter-RAI assessment identifies or can identify that are contributors to malnutrition. So quite a lot we capture. Hold that thought. This slide here really looks at where we're missing a few bits.
No, I think it goes on.
There we go. Okay, so when we're looking at our population, our inter-RAI assessments are really a screening for those that are at risk of malnutrition, and we'll have a look at our CAPs, which are our now called collaborative action plans. And I like that collaborative action plan because it's showing an action plan of how we might address some of this risk. And the next part then goes on to look at for those that have been identified as being at risk of malnutrition, requiring then further comprehensive nutrition assessment, diagnosis, and then some really good treatment plan. All right, so I'm just going to take you back. We've had a look at where the determinants might be found in our inter-RAI assessment. Lots of really good information. Our CAP is triggered largely, if we look at number 1 there, that's the home care and the long-term care facilities assessment, really with BMI. And if your BMI is 22 or more, it's not going to trigger at all, and then it triggers for either low risk or higher risk. With the acute care assessment and the palliative, they then factor in whether weight loss has occurred, so slightly different there. This is the back end of some of the case study. So I just wanted to point out here that this assessment, this woman has a weight of 53 kilos and a BMI of 20. So her CAP, her undernutrition CAP did trigger. Interestingly though, if we'd done her assessment 2 months prior to that, her BMI was a bit higher and it wouldn't have triggered at all. Her BMI in the 2 months prior was a BMI of 23. And it wouldn't have captured. Okay, this is a little bit about her, and I need you to just take another couple of notes. There are a couple of things for this case study that hasn't made it in. But she's a 93-year-old female. She lives in a serviced apartment. She had a chronic leg weakness, which really infected her mobility, that also resulted in collapse. She'd had a couple of falls that had then resulted in fracture or dislocation. Her mood was low. She would say that she would just quite like to shut her eyes and not wake up again. She was happy to have friends come and visit her in her apartment, but she'd really lost the interest of being in a bigger group. So she was no longer going along to the dining room to eat her main meal, which she'd been doing. She wasn't wanting to participate in the village sort of activities. She had been making her other meals at home independently and could no longer do that. She had a very small oral intake. She was picking at her meals. I was there in mid-afternoon and she'd had her lunch delivered, which she hadn't really touched the main. And I think she ate about 3 grapes out of the little bottle of fruit. She was also had quite her short-term memory impairment was quite significantly impaired. Although she didn't have a diagnosis of a cognitive impairment, she was also in some level of pain. She was taken by Miss Daisy out to get her grocery shopping due to that mobility. When she got down to the supermarket, she was met by a supermarket worker who would help to push her around. So she had her Miss Daisy helper and her, so it was two people to help her get around the supermarket and to choose what she would like. And she had difficulty certainly preparing food, and even the family were concerned about her putting away things after washing a cup, because any of that reaching, she was likely to lose her balance and then fall. So let's have a think. Your turn now. Think about, and some of you in the room here will have a piece of paper, and you might like to circle the causative factors of malnutrition.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, on that page there. And if you are online, hopefully you've received in the handout a copy of this, having a look at those determinants of malnutrition and where, in what parts of the inter-RAI assessment they might map to. And we're going to give you about 5 minutes together.
Yeah. So what do we do about people online for this? They've already seen. Just can you tell them that?
I did.
Oh.
Yep. So if you're online, you should have received a handout of that as part of the slides.
Okay.
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
Karen, we did have breakouts here so that they could talk about it. So you don't have to do it as yeah, I think so. So you don't have to do it as an individual.
Yeah, so if you're online, you're going to shortly be broken off into your little groups to talk. Don't spend too much time getting to know each other. Just crack into it, and then we'll see you back in a few minutes. Here we go. All right. So having a quick look here in the yellow triangle, living alone. She's eating alone increasingly. Mobility limitations, physical inactivity. She has some pain, which she largely would forget about actually. She has difficulties with shopping, preparing meals, poor appetite. She's really lost interest in life. Possibly a depression. There'd been a referral to a GP to have a little look at that. An element of a cognitive impairment, certainly an unwillingness to kind of eat, and then that has contributed to a low intake. All right, and in the inter-RAI assessment, we see that captured in section K with her poor appetite and eating two or fewer, eating one or less meals over the last couple of days. She has difficulty with shopping and preparing meals. Okay, she's in pain, physical inactivity. In section 1 of the home care, we see that she's living alone. Eating alone isn't sort of captured specifically in either of those two assessments. She does have a sensory impairment. She is, section G picks up her mobility limitations, and in section E we're looking at her mood and interest in life. Okay, so we can see from those slides that there are factors that are both directly contributing to a low intake and then indirectly contributing. And what do we do next? So from the CAPS manual, the goals are to identify and, where appropriate, address the underlying diseases, conditions, medications, social context that contribute to undernutrition if possible, to facilitate then appropriate referrals, to implement a reasonable treatment plan, to make sure that they've got an adequate calorie intake, and to hopefully prevent further weight loss, and to increase quality of life by preventing the negative consequences of undernutrition. So those are the goals. So the first thing would be to provide some support to look at, and I think going back to those, looking at the direct and indirect, can we care plan around some of those factors, looking at access to shopping, cooking, eating, to then look at food first approach, to make sure that she's eating regularly, high energy and high protein foods, little and often. So if we have a bit more of a look at this, wonder how we can look at obtaining and making sure that she's getting a variety of foods. Can we refer to other support services as are needed? So another opportunity for some discussion, and we'd love your feedback. And am I right, we're not going to break out into the online rooms, but if you are near somebody online and can gather and share, thinking about what you think might be the support services that this case study would benefit from, and where you think the service gaps exist in your area. If you were looking at this client and you were thinking about having to care plan around this, what do you think you might utilise, and what are some bits you might like to utilise but you're not sure that you've got access to?
So if we just take a couple of minutes to have a think about what you've got in your areas and what you've got, and also have a think about not necessarily just services, but your knowledge and your skills and that of your teams and where those gaps are perhaps. So what additional resources can we be looking to put in place to make sure that if you're faced with a case study like this or other similar case studies, what have you got at the moment and what are you missing? I've put post-its around the room where if you want to just jot things down, you can, and we'll collect those up. But I'm also quite keen to have a bit of a discussion around this as well. So if you're online and you want to chip in and tell us what you think the gaps might be, where we need to focus our energies, that would be really helpful. And similarly in the room, if you've got ideas like that, we can have a sort of a bit of a discussion, and I'm going to take some notes if I can find my pen. So this is where I really want to pick your brain and get the information. As a little bit of background, we're doing some work at the moment revising the inter-RAI caps, and one of the studies we're doing in New Zealand was looking at the long-term care outcome of the caps versus a validated malnutrition screening tool. The screening tool itself picked up just over 50% of aged care residents at being risk of malnutrition, whereas inter-RAI picked up less than 30%. So there's quite a mismatch between a validated tool and what's actually being picked up by the cap at the moment. Internationally, that's being recognised and there's some work underway, but it goes beyond just recognising these people, but actually then what do we do with them? If I'm going to recommend to the international group, we're going to pick up over 50% of our residents, we need to have the resources and the capabilities to actually be able to deal with that. So that's where we need your input. So thoughts, no stupid ideas, everything's welcome really, and where do we need to focus our energies? So if you're online, feel free to unmute and chip in.
And I'll be the runner with the mic in the room.
Thank you. Thanks, Nori.
Okay, general discussion. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm really hoping someone's got some ideas or we're stuck.
I think we should have dietitians in care homes.
And I didn't pay Nairi to say that.
I'm always asking for them to come and nobody seems to know how to make them come.
Some sort of consistent observation of what is actually being in, what intake is happening, breakfast, lunch and dinner.
So some sort of food recording.
Is anybody working in care homes here? I know how difficult that would be.
Sounds possible, but yeah.
No, that's actually right where I'm looking, because we've got also tools where you don't have to write down every single food, but you can still record the quantities, and some aged care facilities do that already.
Yeah.
I'll put it back though. How do we do that in the community?
Yeah. I just want to be a bit provocative.
Yeah, please.
So the question about, has this lady got an advanced care plan? And is she making some personal choice here? Now, I know there's some cognition impairment. So how does the assessment think about that as being a possible track, as well as all the things around increasing her nutrition and what's the level of care she needs? But I'd be asking as well, does she have an advanced care plan? And if she has, what's in it?
And what level of input is warranted based on that?
We've got a hand up at the back online.
This is the first one. This is the question more than
Okay, there's a question.
Question. So not an assessor, but wondering what services are in place to help fill the gap for someone eating alone and having HC assessments if there's no family?
It's a really good question. So what community supports and oh, she is there.
Hang on.
Yeah.
We've got lots more, but have you got a comment on that one?
I was just going to mention our visiting service. At
From?
Age Concern. I'm from Age Concern New Zealand.
Thank you.
My role is Health Promotion Manager. Another arm of our organisation is the visiting service. So there's one-on-one support there for this person who is feeling.
Is that nationally available, Tina?
It's not support workers though, they're visitors.
They're
social
visitors, yeah.
They cook her a meal and sit down and eat it with her.
No, but they could be armed with information, and they could, they could discuss meals and food and potentially get her excited about food again.
Yeah. Okay, another one just in front.
I do think that there is a real lack of support. I work for Access Community Health, so we often send people in to do meal prepping, and also just to make sure, like, safety checks during the day to make sure that they actually have eaten. But then there's, unless they're actually feeding back to the nurses, and there is a bit of a lack of what's actually no one's overseeing. Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing? So within health promotion, Age Concerns do their own thing locally, and we've got a number of Age Concerns that run cooking classes that are like 6 weeks long. We've got Man with a Pan down in
Senior chef, I know.
Yeah, yes, but Nutrition Foundation of New Zealand has folded, and they were the main impetus around that. So so we're on our own now, and we're looking for resources to expand our nutrition program.
So, Tina, I can put you in touch with Diabetes Aotearoa, because they've picked up the Nutrition Foundation, not senior chef, but that sort of thing. So there are options. I can talk to you about that.
Okay,
Karen, have you got more online?
A really good one, actually. HCSS providers need a kitty of knowledge around what is available in their region to refer or support in place, what is available.
Great suggestion.
Lots of comments around age concern programs being available in different places. But also we've got one here, after my own heart, needing OT for cooking, access for food, physio for mobility, and SLT for dysphagia management. A multidisciplinary rehab approach would contribute to alleviating this person. Karen has also put up something called under nutrition. So those from Christchurch, because I know Karen's in Christchurch. That might be.
I'm not too sure what that. I have to follow that one up.
However,
Karen could unmute.
Karen's got a couple.
Oh, okay.
Karen, can you unmute and talk about that? Because you've actually put a lot of comments up there which are really interesting.
Is this me, Karen? Karen Ng?
Yes.
Oh, there are a lot
Thank
of
you,
Karens. It was just a typo, actually. It was just the second part of my sentence, that a multidisciplinary rehab approach would contribute to alleviating the person's undernutrition.
Yeah, nice. I think I was really interested today with Minister Costello that there was looking at increased GP and nursing, and I thought, where's allied health? Because I do think that that wider allied health team, not just dietitians, Nori, although I appreciate the shout out, have got a real role to play in this.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
A couple other things. Melanie has posted a link to an age concern site about nutrition. Also, Susie has put in options and support seem limited for those living and working in the LTCF rural setting. So that kind of needs some work.
Nice, thank you.
Pip has also said that a training session and basic resources for needs assessors in regards to how to respond to this CAP would be helpful. Provisional information guidance to give to clients and when to refer on for more investigation or specialist services, dietitians, etc. would be great. We are lucky to have Amy in our team who has delivered this to us, but would be useful for all needs assessors across the board.
Yeah, I think Amy's going to be busy.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sorry, lastly, just Sarah, was the example able to visit GP diagnosis for cognitive impairment and any other factors that may have contributed to her loss in BMI and low interest in eating?
Did she visit?
I was going to say, as a GP, that's a very rapid loss of BMI.
Yeah. Yeah, it had. She had not too long before seeing a GP. Certainly for mood, I'm not quite sure what had happened before for further assessment.
So I have another idea. This is near and dear to my heart because my parents live in Canada, and my mum has dementia, and my dad is one of those guys who doesn't know how to cook and doesn't want to learn. So I was thinking, what about the idea of having once a week or a fortnightly community meal where a meal's provided? My mum goes to dementia care once a week, and she eats more there than she does at home because she's with other people.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it'd be really rough estimate, but you could potentially maybe weigh their plate before it was given to them and afterward, just to take a rough guess on what they're eating. I don't know.
I really like your ideas. For my PhD, I had, in fact, one of my students is online today, and she raced around and weighed meals before and after they were given to residents so that we knew exactly what they ate. But it is so labour intensive that we need to come up with something a little bit simpler than that. But I like your concept, I really do. I think what's coming through here is that there are lots of really good ideas, and I go back to NIRE's Ageing Well and Caring Together, in that we have these ideas, but I think we really need a wider input to actually create them. That for me to say this is what needs to happen as a dietitian is not necessarily realistic. So we really do need to look at that. Sorry, Karen.
Another Karen. I just when I was a NASC assessor, there were a few things that stood out for me when I was working there. Well, one was shopping, and online shopping wasn't as big then, but it's definitely helpful now. And could there be some sort of support service to help older people with online shopping? I think older people, my mum lives with me and she's nearly 83 and she's really, really good online. Like, she'd be able to manage fine. So I'm not saying that it's always a barrier, but this particular person, it was a big effort for shopping for her, wasn't it? And maybe, and she had a bit of cognitive impairment. So I don't know. I feel like there's a bit of a gap there to get groceries into somebody's home. But also it's hard. It was hard as a NASC assessor getting heights and weights of people, or weights especially, even if the GP referral came in and undernutrition was flagged as an issue. There weren't sometimes really regular recent weights, so you could track someone really well. But I love when I was in aged care and a dietitian would come in to help us with someone with a particular issue, my growth and knowledge just went 600% higher, and I could apply that to a lot of other residents. Just the value of that education was incredible.
And that interdisciplinary reciprocation. Yeah, no, that's really good. Height and weights are always an issue, even in the hospitals, to get height and weight. So I hear your pain. Yeah.
And hospitals have so many more staff than primary care.
Sorry. I think there is a little bit of a gap as well, because I think now with online shopping that people have a lot of food in the home, but often what do they do with the food? And so I don't know whether there's some sort of way that there's photos or something, for like, this is what you do for lunch and this is what you do for breakfast and dinner, because I think often they have the food, and I know a lot of our support workers are clearing out fridges and things because people, families are, online shopping for people, and then they're having all this food and they don't know what to do with it. It's quite sad.
And I think online shopping is a really important part and way of being able to procure food. What I've noticed is that there's a number of people who really enjoy still being able to go to the supermarket, and it becomes a bit of a social outing, an opportunity to get out of the house, to actually go and look and select and choose your food is really important. And so perhaps even that support worker assistance to be able to get around the supermarket.
Last comment here.
Just a couple of things online. Kath was saying that daycare programs can actually be really helpful for social eating, getting people back into Also, Sarah's added that dental challenges can also have an impact as well, and getting those addressed.
You know how hard that is. Thank you. Do you want to make any last comments? So I think the message that's coming through is that there is lots that we could do, and it often comes down to resourcing. And while as a dietitian, I do have those set ideas, it's really nice to hear that other people are thinking about this. In the meantime, what we would be encouraging needs assessors to do, and the same in aged care, is to actually look beyond the undernutrition cap. So while we are firm believers in inter-RAI and what it can do, at the moment we do need to improve this part of care. And so perhaps as you're doing your assessments, actually flagging those other things that have an impact on nutrition is really important. I would say that in the Auckland region, there are no dietitians employed within GP practices. There just doesn't seem to be funding for it. And within the aged care setting, we've just done a nationwide survey of dietetic practice within aged care, and I think we had 8 recipients or 8 participants. So there's a real shortage of people that have this expertise, and we need to think quite carefully about yes, we need to grow the workforce, but in the meantime, how do we actually meet the needs that you're obviously well aware of and telling us about? So I'm very keen to get some packages together to start collating some national resource lists so that people know where to go and what to do, but we can't do that by ourselves. So please, our emails are on the last slide here. We've got lots of other slides. I might just show you this one quickly. There are resources online where if you know someone is at risk, you can actually use. And this last slide here that we will send out also has some resources for sheets that you can give clients in the meantime. But it's very much around giving education. And we all know that education doesn't necessarily change behaviour, but it's a starting point. And that's our email addresses. We'd love to hear from you. And if you want to be part of the Malnutrition Action Group more widely, and also then developing the research that moves forward from this, we would love to hear from you. So thank you for participating today.